Audra Phelps, welcome to In My Shell. I'm really
Thank
excited to have you
you.
here today. Yeah, I'm really excited that you reached out. It was something I wasn't expecting, so I think it's really great.
Cool. Good.
Yeah. So I know that you have your own company called Mama Audra, where you help specifically women who once were members of the Mormon community and help them find out who they are, living their life through their own purpose and their authenticity. And I think that's really admirable.
Thank you. Yeah. That's what I do now. I'm a
Mhm.
coach just for ex-Mormon moms who are navigating what is life going to look like now. So I help them build the next steps.
Yeah. But I do want to go back a little bit to
Sure.
understand what made you want to help ex-Mormon moms. Um, I think it's very interesting. I think the Mormon religion is very interesting. I think a lot of people do. Can you give us maybe like a small example of what it was like growing up? Because I know the gender roles are very traditional. Um, Men typically work, they find their purpose, their
Yep.
passion. Women stay at home. Um, Briefly, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, so I was raised in a very strict Mormon household. And let me just preface the story that, like, my story of leaving is not meant to say, that there was a right or a wrong way or to convince other people to leave. It just was my sort of coming into myself,
Hmm.
really, and realizing that the church didn't align with who I was. But that took me 35 years to come to that conclusion. um, so the church, for those who are not very familiar, the Mormon church, the LDS church, Latter-day Saints, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, all the same thing, just like many names for the same thing. And it's definitely a high demand religion. It is more than just a belief in God. It's more than just attending church on Sunday. It is absolutely everything. It's your identity. It's what you do on a Sunday and a Saturday and a Wednesday and a Monday. It's what you eat. It's what you drink. It's very prescribed, and just you described it very well, where there's specific gender roles, and so men, their primary role is as the provider for the family. The church is all about families, big families, lots of children. And the women are the nurturers. The women stay at home. The women raise the children. The women are taking care of everyone else's needs. And so from a very young age, I knew from singing in church, from Sunday school lessons, from lessons at home, from everything that I was taught, that I was going to be a wife, that I was going to get married in the Mormon temple, and I was going to have children. And like, that was kind of the end. You get married, you have children. That's your role, is to have kids and to then take care of everybody. It's also a religion that's very much based on obedience.
Hmm.
So you learn very early on that your worth is determined by how obedient you are. And so, like, as a small child, I remember even being in Sunday school, like, some of the things that they would teach, like, didn't really make sense to me. And I was kind of the one raising my hand, like, what? That doesn't make any sense. What if I don't want to do that? And I and I was told that my doubts were sinful, and that if I was feeling doubts, that those were coming from Satan, and that I needed to pray more and read my scriptures more, and I just needed to have more faith so that I could make my will the Lord's will. It was all about being obedient to what God wanted, from everything to not drinking coffee all the way through, to no sex before marriage, or your belief in the doctrine of the church. Everything had to be aligned. So the upbringing it's a lot of conditioning. There's definitely you're programmed into who you are, your identity, what you believe. And if you don't follow that cookie cutter, that prescribed life, there's a lot of judgment there. And you're constantly thinking about the consequences of eternal damnation and not receiving blessings in heaven. And then as you become a mother, those consequences become, if you leave, you're going to destroy your children's salvation. So it's in a lot of ways very manipulative for me. In my lived
Mhm.
experience, it was very, very manipulative.
Wow. That definitely feels like, just from hearing your own experience, that was a lot of pressure. Well, especially
Yes.
before, your brain was like fully developed. Um, I am very curious. When you were the one that was saying, "Oh, I don't really think this, fits for me." What was that experience like of not having a safe space to confide in someone? Because I was listening to a couple of different podcasts that you were on, and you really found your community, your friends outside of the church. So when you were voicing
Yeah.
your opinion inside, did other women maybe agree with you, or were you able to find anyone that was on the same page within the church that was feeling the way that you were?
No, not at the time. And I would voice them to family members and be quickly put in my place. And
Hmm.
so I learned to push it down. I learned to not share it because I would be judged for it. There's a lot of judgment in the church. There's a lot of sort of policing each other. If
Hmm.
I mean, even like if I didn't go to church one Sunday, somebody would show up on my doorstep that evening with a plate of cookies and be like, "We missed you at church," which on the surface looks like, oh, wow, they were thinking of me, but really quite passive aggressive. Like, why weren't you there? We noticed that you weren't there. What's going on? But in a judgmental way, not really in like a caring kind of a way. And so I pushed a lot of my doubts down. I had them, they would surface, and I would push them right back down because I was afraid to tell other people that I was doubting. I was afraid of the judgment that I would receive. I was afraid they would go tell my bishop, who was my church leader at the time. And then I would have to be called into his office and talk about the, the doubts that I had and how I was questioning. And then I felt like something was wrong with me, that I was doubting because I wasn't righteous enough, because I didn't have enough faith, and nobody else was doubting, so they must have had more faith than me. It was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of pressure, but also a lot of pressure to just fit the mold, fit the
Right.
mold, fit the mold, fit the mold. Yeah.
And do you think that pressure is what caused those physical manifestations of, the panic attacks that you were having and that depression that you fell into just because you had to withhold everything?
Yeah, absolutely. At the time, I didn't identify it as that. At the
Mhm.
time, I didn't know the source of my panic attacks and anxiety. Those started happening. So I got married very young because that was my prescribed life. You get married very young. So I was 20 years old when I got married. And then I had 3 kids very quickly. I had my oldest when I was only 22 years old, and then I was done having children at 26.
Wow.
And um, when my youngest was a baby, no, when he was about 4 years old, I was really struggling with severe anxiety and panic attacks and depression, and to the point where my panic attacks were coming almost every night. And
Wow.
hindsight looking back, that's exactly what it was. It was the pressure. It was the pressure to live up to an expectation of who I should be that wasn't my own expectation for myself. It was an external authority giving me my definition of a good wife, of a good mom, of who I need to be, what I need to believe, what I need to do. And I was really blindly following that. And it was my body basically screaming at me that I was living in a life that was not mine. I was living in a life that was not aligned with who I was. Now, at the time, I didn't recognize it for that. And so, you know, I looked for a lot of different things I could do. So I did go on antidepressants. Those did not work for me. They work for a lot of people, but they did not work for me. And then I also started exercising a lot because I did a lot of research about the power of endorphins and how powerful it can be, you know, moving your body and how that can really help with anxiety and depression. And what one thing that did for me, even though I wasn't understanding the source of the anxiety and the depression, was one of the things I did for exercise was I joined like a training group. We would train for different races, like 5Ks and little mini triathlons. I wasn't a runner. I didn't really know how to run, but I was like just looking for some things, and I knew I needed a community. I knew I needed some sort of accountability. And so I started making friends with a lot of the women in my training group, and none of them were Mormon or really knew much about the Mormon church. And I was starting to see this real contrast between the people who I thought were my friends at church and then my friends in this running group. And it was like, oh, wow, they're not judging me for anything. Like I can just be open and honest, and they're just accepting and they're curious. But it felt very freeing. And it was like, oh, this is what a safe space really feels like. Church was never really a safe space. So I could start to see that contrast. So that was kind of, you know, I often say that my journey of leaving the church, like the letters of the alphabet, you couldn't go from letter A straight to letter Z. Like you had to have every letter in between. And so for me, you know, the anxiety and depression was enough to move me in a direction. And then my experience with friends was starting to see a contrast. And I was already questioning a lot of things in church, and it kind of gave me a little bit of bravery to maybe look at things a little more objectively as I was starting to see things. So that I was slowly kind of moving down that alphabet of what I call a slow erosion of leaving.
Wow. That's definitely interesting. Like you do have to, I guess, go through it to really figure out what does work for you and what doesn't work for you. And I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting because when you were a part of the Mormon church, did you typically, like, was it okay, considered okay to hang out with people that weren't Mormon, or was it typically like frowned upon?
That's a good question. It was okay, but the intention was always that you would bear your testimony, you would give them a Book of Mormon, that you would
Oh.
be a missionary, that you would bring them into the faith because they were lost souls if they weren't converted to Mormonism. The Mormon church really truly believes that every single person on this planet should be Mormon. And
Hmm.
so, and they have this saying, every member a missionary. So yeah, you could be friends, but there was always like an ulterior motive
Huh.
of having friends outside of the church. And then, you know, I even remember as a teenager being warned about having friends who weren't Mormon and being careful that they didn't lead me down the wrong path. And especially with boys, because you marry other Mormons. And so,
Oh.
you know, yeah. So it was always like, be careful who you hang out with, because who you hang out with is who you marry. And you need to make sure that you marry a Mormon. I mean, you know, I was being told this when I was like 14 years old, all about finding my future spouse and making sure that it was a Mormon who could take me to the Mormon temple.
Wow. Okay. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. I,
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who are religious, spiritual. Everyone is different on the spectrum. But my friends who try to persuade me to believe what they believe, I find that I have to take a lot more space and I can only dedicate a certain amount of time to them because I believe what I believe. And I think everyone has to figure that out for themselves. And no one should be pressured to believe something that doesn't fit them. So I think religion's
Yeah.
just super tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've largely come to that conclusion now, but it was 10 years of questioning and a lot of experiences in my alphabet of exodus to come to that conclusion. And for me, when I really started to understand that was when I moved overseas. So
Hmm.
I had been questioning for many years, and part of sort of one of my letters was going back to school and choosing a career.
Hmm.
And I had chosen to become a teacher. So I was a high school biology teacher. Now, was I really passionate about being a teacher? No, but I really liked science, and I was already kind of going against the grain by going to school for to have a career. And nobody in the church would have looked at me sideways if as a teacher, because that's the most benign job a Mormon mom could have. My role was to be at home, not to put my kids in daycare. And so as a teacher, it's like, oh, well, okay, this is great. I'll have the same schedule as my kids. We'll have the same holidays. And my husband was also a teacher. So it was a decision that I made because that was it aligned most closely with my prescribed role of being a mom, period, the end. Right. So anyway, so my husband and I we found out about the international school ring and how as teachers we could go, there's these international schools that are that are very similar to like private schools in the US, and I could still be a high school biology teacher and he could be an elementary teacher and we could see the world. And so when our kids were ages 7, 9, and 11, and we were what my husband and I were both questioning at that time, we were kind of already one foot out the door, but we moved to Kazakhstan, which is not a country many people have heard of or even know where it is. But so we moved to Kazakhstan. And what that did for me was two things. One was it gave me physical separation from the church. So, you know, the church is very good with a sense of community. You go to church with the same people that live in your neighborhood. So there's proximity. It keeps you very busy. So when I was in the US in the Mormon bubble, I was very much caught up in the minutia of everything. I didn't even have time to think about my own thoughts, let alone, you know, analyze whether I was going to make a huge identity shift. But when I moved overseas and nobody even knew what Mormon was, it was
Hmm.
like I had this physical separation to see things objectively, and I could start to kind of identify a lot of the indirect messaging that I was getting from the church. And I had time to process it and think about it without being constantly bombarded. And the second thing that did, which is you know, related to what you were saying earlier about people can have, you know, a variety of different beliefs, was I was now being exposed to that variety of different beliefs, right? Like
Right.
I was in a country where nobody even knew what Mormon was. I was in an international school where people were from 30 plus different countries, and I was traveling the world with my kids, and we would go to like a Hindu temple in India, and the people seemed so happy and peaceful, and the temples were, they seemed beautiful and sacred and spiritual. And I had a lot of cognitive dissonance, like, wait a second, but I was told that Mormons were the only ones with true happiness. And Mormons were like the one true faith, the one true way, and every other religion was somehow deceived by Satan. And so it was kind of confusing to me at first. And I had to really sit back and analyze, this is a totally different lived experience than what I was told this would be. And it was the same thing when I went to like a Catholic cathedral or a Muslim mosque or a Zoroastrian fire temple. It was like these places felt spiritual and sacred. And many of the families that I was meeting that followed these different beliefs seemed very happy and joyful. And I started to realize that there was this beautiful diversity of beliefs. And I started to feel arrogant for feeling like I had the one and only truth, and I'm going to tell all these people that they're wrong.
Mm.
And so that move overseas for me was really that this was the last few letters in my alphabet, right? It was like, oh my gosh, all of those things that I was being told, if that's not true, then what else wasn't true?
Oh, that's really good.
Yeah.
Wow. So the physical separation, because I know you've been overseas for the past 13 years. So the physical
Yeah.
separation and
Yeah.
then being exposed to a global perspective. So now you're like very more so independent from the church, but I'm very curious. I think in one of the podcasts that I listened to, your relationship with your family wasn't the same once you left the church, and there's only certain topics that you'll cover. How did you decide to implement those boundaries so that you still maintain a connection with them?
That was and is the only way to continue to have a relationship. And I want those family members, not all of them, not all of my family members still have access to me. I'll put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I still wanted to have connection to family. And so right at the very beginning, I made it very clear what I would and would not talk about. Not because I didn't want to talk about my faith transition and leaving the church and what my beliefs are now, but because the few times in the beginning that we did have a conversation, I was not met with understanding and love. I was met with anger and judgment and accusatory, like finger pointing. It was very triggering. It was very hard. It was very difficult. I learned that even though I was told that love was unconditional, that actually it had conditions. And so I was no longer meeting those conditions for worthiness in the church, for to receive love and acceptance from God, and to receive the same love and acceptance from many family members. And so, and also, I was raising 3 kids, and my kids were ages 9, 11, and 13. And so my mama bear came out, and it was like, I've got to protect my kids from this too.
Mm.
So, I had to have very clear boundaries on what I would and would not talk about, what they could talk about with my kids and what they couldn't talk about with my kids. And then following through with that too. And, with kindness, like, it's not like it sounds like an ultimatum, but that really wasn't what it was. It was more like, this is what I need for this relationship to work. And if you still if you want to be in my life and I want to be in your life, then this is the boundary that we need to hold. And that's been it's been an evolving situation. Things are definitely difficult at times, but we've been able to kind of find a middle ground where we have an understanding, but certain topics are off limits.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that makes sense, and I'm sure it's better for both parties so that
Yeah.
you still can have like a civil dialogue for sure.
Yeah.
Um, but I am curious just because it's it's kind of like because I heard you use an example how um you left the church before your husband. And I think That's very interesting. I want to know what that experience was like within your marriage and how he didn't try to convince you to come back and how he kind of was, from what I understand, more like a soundboard than anything, than not trying to push you back into it.
Yeah, we have always had a relationship that's based on open communication. And one of the things I love the most about my husband is that he listens to understand. He doesn't listen to think about his response or listen so that he can figure out how to convince me of his way. He's always just listened to understand. And we don't always agree on things, but he's always listened to understand. And so when I made the decision to leave the church, I was like 100% sure. And him and I, like I said, we'd been questioning together. We weren't always on the same page, but we were very open about our doubts and our questioning throughout those years. And so when I made the decision to leave, he was the first one I told. And he said, I can see that this is the what you need to do, that this is the right decision for you. He said, but I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. And he said, I think I'm going to continue to go to church, and if the kids want to go, I'll take the kids. And at the time, we were living in Kazakhstan. So we had been in Kazakhstan for about 2 years. And there was actually a very small Mormon church that you could attend. The
Oh,
service was in Russian. So we had to wear
wow.
headphones, and the American missionaries would translate, and we would listen to the translation. But so he would offer it up to the kids if they wanted to go to church, and the two youngest, who were 9 and 11, were like, no way. I'm staying home with Bob. So I was like, oh, okay, apparently they didn't love church as much as we thought they did. But our 13-year-old held on for a couple months, and she would say, yeah, I want to go. And so we gave them that choice. And then about a year later, he came to me and said, I'm done too. But his process was a much slower and quieter process than mine. He needed, you know, he needed more processing time. And I think I knew that he would eventually come to that conclusion, but I didn't want to pressure him that way. I knew that needed to be 100% his. So I was a little bit impatient for a while, because there was maybe things I wanted to do on Sunday, and he was going to church. I was like, really? You're still doing that? So I was impatient for a
Mhm.
while. But we did give each other that space and that independence to be individuals in the marriage.
Yeah, well, that sounds nice that, in such a like a claustrophobic space, he was like a refreshing breath of air. Um,
Yeah.
I think I think also that's really important in any kind of relationship to have someone that listens and doesn't try to persuade you or doesn't try to tell you what they think is right and kind of like helps you figure it out for yourself so that you can see what you're actually trying to understand or navigate.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
mhm. And I know that you are moving back to the US and
Yeah.
like at the end of the month, right? At the end
Yeah,
of
in like
June.
3 days.
My gosh. That's insane. Oh my gosh. And
Yeah, so I'm currently as well. I Yesterday was my very last day of work as a school director. So I've
oh,
I've been a school director in a very small country called Timor Leste, which is we share an island with Indonesia. So we're in Southeast Asia currently. And I mean, this was all kind of part of my own identity shift, and reclamation was also a career shift, and realizing that I was in a career, like I described, that was like not, I chose it not for me. I chose it
mhm.
because it was the most benign job a Mormon mom could have. Um, and so as I was doing some real deep dives into okay, I'm living this life that was determined more than 20 years ago when I was young, 20-year-old Mormon Audra living the prescribed life. But now I'm living in the consequences of those decisions when I was a totally different person. Right.
Mhm.
And I thought, I I can change the trajectory of my life now. And being a school director, I mean, there was a lot of good things about it, but it's not really my passion. It doesn't really get me out of bed in the morning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yes, so now I'm moving back to the US. I've been doing some coaching part-time while also running a school. So it's been a little exhausting. So now I'm really excited that I'm going to be doing it full time. So I'm moving back to the US and I'll be doing coaching for ex-Mormon moms full time, either one-on-one coaching or specifically through my Reclaimed program. Yeah.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. That must feel very exciting to do something that you're passionate about.
Yeah, I decided this is the path that I chose based on going through my own identity work and my own, I took a real deep dive into who I am. How do I know who I am? Really learning to sort of pay attention to my own intuition and how you your subconscious mind really speaks to you through your body, right? So like
Mhm.
just as when I was a young mom in the Mormon church and my body was screaming at me through anxiety and depression and panic attacks, I had to learn to tune back into myself, and I had to learn how to become the only authority in my life that mattered, that I didn't have to be constantly seeking permission from an external authority or from someone else to tell me who I am or what I believe or what I should do or how I should raise my kids. And so I had done a lot of that work on myself. And I had a coach that I was working with, and she said to me, I said, I think I need a different career. And I said, but the things I love about my job, like if, that I would like to continue, that I would like to integrate into my life moving forward, is I really love working with students. Like when students would come into my classroom and download their problems. And then when I moved into administration, I really liked it when parents would come into my office and would ask for parenting advice, or they were having difficulties with their kids or transitioning to a new country or things like that. So I really like that. So I'm thinking some kind of like life coaching or parenting coaching. And she knew my history and she had known the work that I had gone through to uncover old conditioned beliefs that were still there in my subconscious, my inner Mormon critic that would still rear her ugly head every now and then. And she said to me, have you ever thought about working with other ex-Mormon moms? And like, as soon as she said that, I just burst into tears. And I was like, that's it. That's it. So I had a full body reaction to it. And because I remember when I left, it's now been 11 years
Mhm.
since I've left the church. And at the time, I didn't know anyone else who had left. I didn't know of any resources to help me navigate this. I was grieving so many things. I was grieving a loss of identity, a loss of certainty, a loss of family, a loss of friends and community. I had a lot of mom guilt because it was like, am I screwing up my kids? I started raising them in this church and now I've ripped the rug of certainty right out from under them. And now how am I going to raise them? And so there's so many emotions you go through when you leave. And I didn't have anyone to help me through it. I didn't have any tools or strategies. My emotions were all over the place. And I just thought, gosh, if I had had like a mentor to walk me through this, the healing would have been a lot faster. That's for sure.
Wow.
So Yeah, and I love it. I just love working, with the moms that come to me, and I'm very passionate about it. I love the transformation I see. I love being a safe space for them. And so I'm excited to be doing it full time.
Wow. And it also just goes to show you, like, if you didn't have that coach, like, your life could
Yeah.
be totally different right now.
Yeah.
You probably would have come to do this, but maybe at a later point in time. But the fact
Yeah.
that you're doing it now is, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It all kind of the timing was not my own. The timing, it all just kind of worked out the way that it needed to. And
hmm
and I love that. Yeah.
And so, what could someone expect if they're coming to you to be mentored and to kind of like heal the past, I don't know if trauma is the right word, but the past experiences that they've had? What can they expect to learn in your program?
Oh, a program, the very first thing we do is we start identifying those old beliefs, because
Mhm.
the the conditioning is so deep in your subconscious. It's down at the identity level, which is the deepest part of your psyche. And it's there, but it's in your subconscious, so you're not aware of it, but it's determining your thoughts and your behaviors and your emotions. And so we have to really start learning how to identify those those hidden identities and beliefs that were given to you that aren't yours. And one of the first ways we do that is we start paying attention to emotions. We start paying attention to your body. What is your body telling you? If something feels constrictive, like heavy on your chest or tight, like you just can't get a breath, there's probably a belief there that's running the show in the background that's not really aligning with who you are. So let's uncover it. Like, what's the emotion you're feeling? Where is it coming from? What's the belief that's giving you this emotion? The belief is usually tied to some kind of a definition of what a good mom is, or what a good wife is, or a good woman is. And those definitions were given to you by someone else. In the case of the clients I work with, it was given to them through a religion, through the Mormon religion.
Mhm.
And then there's a lot of guilt when they're not living up to this expectation of what a good mom is. And so when they feel constrictive, really that definition is not their own. So then we go through some work of like, okay, what's a better feeling belief? And really starting to sort of rewire your subconscious so that the pattern is not the old pattern that you've been used to replaying over and over, but you can start to build a new pattern and a new habit with a belief that's really yours, that is really aligned, and you chose it because it felt good, it felt expansive, it felt open and airy. So, and that's not easy work. It takes a lot of observation, a lot of journaling. Some women really respond well to hypnotherapy, but it takes a lot of like commitment to really want to uncover those things and change. And then once we can kind of start to get that ball rolling, then we can talk about how this translates to your parenting and how you can do this with your kids. A lot of women come to me, and at first it's all about, I'm really confused about how to raise my kids. I have a lot of guilt, but we have to get to the identity level first, because parenting and motherhood is a subset of who you are. We've got to uncover some of those old beliefs first before we can work on your beliefs around parenting and your behavior around parenting.
hmm Wow. Okay. I love what you said of, what did you say? Like, being a parent and a mother is subsequent of who you are. I really
It's a sub,
love
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because I mean, I'm only 26. I'm not married. I don't have kids or anything yet. I haven't made any of those commitments yet. But My very best friend, my childhood friend, she has a daughter who is almost one, and it's so crazy because up until now, like I've seen her transformation and now she's a mom and it's like, wow, like we're at that age and it's so beautiful, but you know, sometimes I have to help remind her who she is because she can kind
Yeah.
of get lost in motherhood, and that's fine. That's a beautiful thing. I think that's what's supposed to happen, but I think it's just another responsibility that I don't know, people just forget who they are. So,
Well, I think, I mean, for the women I work with, they're coming out of a religion that was the conditioning
right,
was really deep with like big consequences. But even women who didn't grow up religiously, the expectation of society is
right.
that that a good mom sacrifices, a good mom always puts her kids first, a good mom really completely loses herself in her children. I mean, this is really the expectation of society too, just with less consequences than if you also have the religious aspect of it. And
Mhm.
so that is an experience that I think is universal for all women as they become a mom. They're trying to find this balance of like, I love my child and I want to give my child everything. But if you aren't taking care of your own needs and you don't have something for yourself and you don't remember that you're also an individual that needs to have success and accomplishment and desires and passions and all of those things, then you're going to lose yourself. And it's going to start showing up as anxiety, as depression. That's how it's going to start showing up as you lose yourself in motherhood. And so it's about coming up with your own definition. You know, a lot of people, a lot of messages in society is that a woman is selfish if she, puts herself first or, you know, has a career or she's trying to have it all, right? There's so much judgment on women there. But let's kind of reframe that. What else could
Yeah.
that mean? Well, that could mean that actually that the woman is fulfilled outside of the home. So when she is home, she's happy and she can dedicate her time to her kids and they're getting the best version of her, right?
Mhm.
And then really she's a better mom because she has time for herself and she has the space to be an individual outside of motherhood. So you can reframe it in a lot of different ways too.
Yeah, that's the side of social media that I'm on for sure. Oh my gosh. Um, are there any stories that you have with a client that has made you realize that this is the work that you're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, I had a client recently that I had a conversation with around she was really struggling with the condition that she needed to get permission to do anything, you
Mm,
know, and with specifically permission from her husband. So she had made the decision to leave the church. So it's not like she was going to church leaders to get permission, but there's definitely a hierarchy in the church of like, the woman is under the man and then the man is under God. So the woman should be submitting to the man as the man submits himself to God. So there was still some conditioning there and that still some of that old programming. And she was in the habit of always asking her husband for permission. She had no autonomy, she had no freedom. And we were able to dive in to where that belief was coming from, to sort of poke holes in it, to realize that it's not an absolute truth, but there was a fear there. There was a fear of if what would happen if she didn't ask his permission first, what would happen if she did something and he wasn't really okay with it. And then as we uncovered it and we did a lot of questioning and her relationship with her husband and her experience with her husband, we really uncovered that that requirement was not him putting it on her, that she was actually, it was just a well-worn pattern in her brain that was replaying every time she wanted to do something. And so she thought that he would be requiring her permission, but really that wasn't even in his head, right? But it's this story we tell ourselves over and over and over that fits the pattern that we think is our reality. And we just need to shift of like, what else could be true? And so that was really powerful as she started to see what a different reality was than the one that she was telling herself. And so from that, she's now been able to make decisions from a place of peace. She's really insecure in what she wants, where she didn't even know what she wanted before because she didn't even let herself think about it. Right.
Right.
And so now when she talks to her husband, it's not out of like, oh, I have to ask him permission for something. It's more of a partnership. And she's understanding that he is not an authority over her, nor was he ever really ever seeking to be an authority over her. And
Right.
so that kind of changed the dynamic of the relationship.
Yeah, that's kind of something similar that I'm learning in therapy right now. Like what's actually happening,
Yes.
what's happening in reality and what's happening in my head. And my therapist always uses the phrase like, let's rewind the tapes. What do the tapes say? And so she has me
Mm-hmm.
do journal prompts. And I am a journaler. Like I like to write about my day, but I don't really like to write about how I feel, if that makes sense. They're two different things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes for me, I like to sit down and just record on my computer what I'm feeling because it's better for me to process that way. But I think that's very interesting because that's something that I'm learning, rewiring that mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, rewiring. And that's a lot of, so the type of coaching I do is NLP, which stands for neuro linguistic programming, which is just like the language of your brain. You know, your subconscious mind is getting in all the information from all of your senses, and it's too much information for your conscious mind to even grasp. And so it filters it according to your lived experience, according to the well-worn patterns, according to the programming, according to what's going to fit the story of what you're telling yourself. You know, there's a lot of confirmation bias, really. You know, you're just looking for the things that you already think are true. So your subconscious is going to bring those things to your awareness. So we do a lot of working with the subconscious and allowing some of those other bits of information to come through to slowly start to change that story that you're telling yourself about your reality, because what else could be true? There's other versions that could be true.
Right. And
Yeah.
maybe for women who are curious about having like a mentor or a coach, but they're
Mhm.
not completely sure if that's something that they want to do maybe right now, like what's a piece of advice that you would maybe give them?
A piece of advice I would give them, I would say start listening to your body. That's the first thing. Start listening to your
Mhm.
body and start really small. You know, women in general, not just women who have left a religion, but we've been conditioned to make sure everyone else is happy. And you know, many times, how many times have you gone out to a restaurant with a friend and they say, "What do you want?" And you say, "I don't know. What are you having?"
Yeah.
So many women do that, right? I don't know. What are you having? Like, you know, you want to make the right decision. You want to do the decision that's acceptable. You want to belong, and you don't even really know what you want because you've been so conditioned to just do what you think everyone else, what will make everyone else happy. And so I would say start listening to your body and start small. When you go to a restaurant, stop saying, "I don't know, what do you want?" and start paying attention to how different things feel in your body. Do I want the pizza or do I want the salad? Well, which one feels good? I mean, I'm being totally honest. Like, if you can start really small, then you start to learn how your body speaks to you. And then you can slowly apply that to bigger decisions. But you
Hmm.
can't make decisions from a place of intuition and make these huge career shift changes or, life transitions if you don't even know how to ask yourself small questions. So start small so that you can learn to trust yourself again and learn to be the authority over yourself piece by piece.
Oh, I think that's great. I'm going to start with that today.
Okay,
It's
good.
like, that's really great. Yeah, no, that's true. It just really makes you think. Like, it's just really, it starts with the smallest of things for
Yeah.
sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Maybe for any women who are ready for some coaching, who feel like, yes, this is something that I feel like I need a mentor. I need someone to walk me through these processes because there's a
Yeah.
whole bunch more. We've just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
Reach out. I'm on social media as Mama Audra. My website is mamaaudra.com. And on the website, there's a free masterclass. That's the 5 shifts every former Mormon mom needs to make. And that's kind of the first step to watch that. And if it resonates, then book a call with me and let's chat and see if the Reclaimed program is a fit for you. Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you.